Welcome to BuzzHouse, a Baker Tilly podcast where you can hear all the buzz around multifamily housing, with all the info you need to help you win now and anticipate tomorrow. Hi, I'm Don Bernards, the principal in charge of Baker Tilly's multifamily housing practice.
And I'm Garrick Gibson, a principal at Baker Tilly, also specializing in consulting on multifamily housing transactions across the country.
Let's get started. For today's episode, Garrick and I are going to give a review of some of the highlights from this past year's BuzzHouse episodes, along with discussing what Garrick and I are looking forward to seeing here in the year ahead in 2026. But to start out, Garrick and I would sincerely like to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in, for telling us how and when you listen, for suggesting topics. It's fun getting out at conferences, people saying, hey, I listened to you. Can you talk about this or that? So we really, truly appreciate that. And it's kind of why we're doing it as well. It's been fun to meet you along the way and looking forward to that continuing here in 26. We also sincerely want to give thanks and shout out to all of our guests joining us on the podcast for both what they do every day in the housing field, and then, of course, for taking time out to join Garrick and I from their busy schedules. Now, before jumping into the discussion with Garrick and I today, I want to give you a few highlights and news from around the industry. HUD recently announced their next round of funding for the Housing Trust Fund campaign. The total program allocated is about $223 million, with a high of $23.5 million to California, and about 36 states receiving somewhere between $3 and $4 million. So that'll be coming out here in 26. HUD recently released their biennial report entitled Worst Case Housing Needs. This is the 20th such report created by HUD. In spite of 2024 producing more units than any year for the past 40 years, HUD's report finds that 8.46 million renter households had, quote-unquote, worst-case housing needs. This is defined as someone whose income is 50% AMI or below, does not receive rental subsidy, and either pays more than 50% of their income on rent and utilities, or lives in severely physically inadequate housing, such as having broken heating and cooling, lacking hot water or a flush toilet, or having rodent infestations. The 8.46 million is consistent with 2023's number of 8.53 million. The report points out the simple mismatch of renters' incomes and costs of housing, which Garrick and I talk obviously about a lot on our program. Switching to legislation, and with this need, this great need, there are a number of pieces of legislation introduced which would be impactful, and we'll continue to watch it here in 2026. And I'll talk about two pieces of proposed legislation. Representative Mike Thompson of California and 32 other Democrats in the House of Representatives recently introduced the American Affordability Act, which has provisions for affordable housing, clean energy, and historic preservation. This proposal includes most provisions for the Affordable Housing and Credit Improvement Act of 2025, the Revitalizing Downtowns and Main Streets Act, the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, and the Workforce Housing Credit Act, and more. It also restores virtually all the clean energy incentives targeted for early sunset by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So that's a lot in there, right? The likelihood of all that passing, unlikely, but it's good to see that momentum and a lot of ideas out there. Somewhat similarly, and additionally, Senator Adam Schiff, also from California, recently introduced legislation that would triple the amount of annual low housing tax credit allocations while providing billions of dollars for housing for people experiencing homelessness and middle-income families. This is called the Housing Building Occupancy Opportunities for Millions Act, or BOOM, with triple states LIHTC allocations for properties that meet minimum requirements, and also creating $10 billion annual loan fund and a $5 billion annual block grant program to expand rental housing for families earning between 60 to 120% of the area median income. So a lot. Homeless individuals, households in those AMIs with that LIHTC is targeting, as well as that middle income. So again, very expansive. It'd be incredible for the housing industry if that passed. Again, probably unlikely how that would pass, but again, interesting to see those acts and bills proposed. As always, Garrick and I will keep you posted here as we move forward in 2026 on this or other legislation coming out. Now, Garrick and I will jump into our year in review. Garrick, I always enjoy this. We've done it now probably 3 or 4 years, and love just kind of going back and forth with you on the past year and also looking ahead. So, Garrick, starting out, what topics, episodes are top of your mind from the last year? What did you enjoy?
I thought about it. I went and kind of looked back and really kind of thought about, okay, what did we do that was slightly different that I thought was kind of interesting? And so I had two that I thought were interesting. So one of the episodes that really stayed with me in 2025 was our conversation with Christina Tatro from HAI Group, because it hit on a part of that affordable housing that we just don't talk about enough, right? The people doing the actual work. As affordable housing transactions get more complex, as you know, right? The challenge isn't just finding projects, it's making sure there are enough trained professionals who actually understand the compliance operations. There's long-term stewardships and complexities there. So that episode was a good reminder that even the best capital stack can fall apart without the right expertise behind it. And what I appreciated most was how practical the conversation was. Christina talks about how modern tech enabled training can help close experience gaps as seasoned housing professionals retire and new teams step in. I know we're seeing a lot of that. But reinforce the idea that education isn't a nice to have in affordable housing. It's actually a core infrastructure that protects affordability and actually reduces risk over the long term, in my opinion. And resonating kind of similar to the overall industry and people, another episode that really resonated me was with our conversation with Ron Thompson from the RED, the Red Academy. What stood out was how clearly it reinforced the idea that affordable housing doesn't scale without local development capacity. We often focus on capital and policy at a national level, but this episode brought that conversation back to the ground, showing how community based developers, when given the right training and support, can actually drive that meaningful and lasting housing outcome. Arun talked about the Red Academy is intentionally building pipelines for local, mission driven type developers who actually understand the neighborhoods they're working in, especially as long term affordability becomes a bigger priority. That local knowledge and trust, in my opinion, will matter a lot more. This episode was a strong reminder that affordable housing works best when development isn't just done in communities, but with the community. And that investing in people is just as important as investing in projects. So those two were sort of in a similar vein and theme. One really focused on the people in the training, and we're losing folks to retirement and a lot of knowledge base there. But then also just focus on the actual community and who's in the area and who's developing the area where a lot of these developments need to happen.
I like that, Garrick. I love that, the focus on the people. Thank you for that. A couple things I'll talk about, Garrick. One that I really enjoyed is our discussion with Pete Sherman of the Charleston Housing Authority. He's the director of development over there. And the discussion was on the use of essential function bonds and public housing repositioning. I always like to dig into the first, right? We always are looking for innovative financing, things that maybe can be replicated and so forth. And this is one of the first, if not the first, RAD Section 18 blend, so public housing repositioning with essential function bonds, so kind of government taxes and bonds. And this project, again, wasn't competitive based on the qualified allocation plan for tax credits. So I had to think about how do we get this much needed rehab done for the project. And again, the Charleston Housing Authority was able to go out because of their portfolio, their internal controls, things of that nature, and get an S&P investment grade rating. The investment grade rating in turn allowed them to get debt below 5%. And again, in the market, it was the interest rates are 6%, even up to 7% and so forth. So being able to get significant rehab done on a project without tax credits. Garrick and I have had a number of guests over the past couple of years tracking both essential function bonds and 501c3 bonds. We've had attorneys and lenders. We're working right now with a nonprofit client looking to acquire some year 15 projects with 501c3 bonds, looking at an interesting potential new construction project that if that moves forward, I'm sure Garrick will have that on the podcast here in 26, a very large workforce new construction project. So really looking forward to seeing the utilization of these various tax and bond products. Again, tax credits are great. They're competitive. We can only do so much. So looking at other sources. Then the other topic I really liked as well, and it was interesting to think about, especially as I alluded to earlier in some of the news with some of the energy benefits being phased out under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. What can we do? How can we look at energy and utilities and things like that? And we had Orlando Valdez with Ion Water joining us to talk about invisible water leaks. And what does that mean? Essentially, it's leaks in your pipes that you don't see on the floor of your building, but they're underground in the ground after the meter, but before they kind of get really into the building and so forth. So the amount of leakage is billions of gallons, which was really news to me, Garrett, and incredible. And some of the technology they're using reduces, and they've done case studies, and I think they've done over 30,000 units putting their technology in. And the savings have been over 50%, which again, for larger portfolios and even small portfolios could be helpful. So I know there's a number of professionals out there, but I think that's going to be a trend with if we don't have large incentives for a few years, how do we be efficient? How do we save money on utilities and so forth? So looking forward to that here in 2026 and beyond as well. So Garrick, as we wrap up, put 2025 behind us, had a couple of people actually, Garrick, tell me yesterday it's the year of the horse, is taking bold action and so forth. So what are you, Garrick, looking forward to transpiring here in the multifamily world in 2026?
Yeah. Well, based on our pre-podcast discussions, like you, I'm looking forward to what comes out of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. I know you had some details you wanted to share later, so I will just say this. Given the shortage of affordable housing across every region of the United States, I'm just hopeful that we get some legislation passed that allows for some ability to make a dent in ever-growing affordable housing crisis. I know Congress has a myriad of things to consider, but affordable housing needs to have some focus, period. In addition, I'm also looking forward to seeing how states respond to the affordable housing crisis in terms of the state agencies. What are going to be their priorities or their QAPs? And I think they're probably going to start evolving toward readiness, financial resilience, and deliverability. In other words, development teams with repeat execution or credibility are going to gain an edge versus just the scoring alone. Because as we know, the best scoring deal isn't always the best closing deal. I've seen this past year, there's just some deals that couldn't get through regardless. So in addition, we are already seeing this, right? So interesting things coming out of states that'll help fill financing gaps. Take Colorado, for instance. I'm not biased here at all, even though I reside here in Colorado, but they have implemented a middle income tax credit. We actually had them on the podcast to discuss it. This is to help the more missing middle projects get off the ground. Furthermore, they are actually now allowing their state affordable housing credit to be accelerated, with 70% being allowed in year one. So it's these kinds of little steps that states can do to help fill in financing gaps and get more deals pushed through to completion. So I hope we'll see more of this from states in 2026 and on. Lastly, I expect to see light tech preservation deals gaining some momentum in 2026. There seems to be a massive number of affordable units aging out, and I'm already seeing a lot of like year 15 activity coming my way. So most of these assets were built with minimal reserves. They had lower original hard cost standards. A lot of them have deferred capital needs. So without any intervention, these units are likely at risk either market conversion or being functionally obsolete, and they're obviously financially stressed due to these refinancing gaps. So I think affordable capital might like these projects due to lower development risk, faster stabilization, and more predictable underwriting. So those are my kind of looking ahead items.
Perfect. No, thanks for that, Garrick. And you kind of alluded to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act or the AHCIA, and that's probably number one on my list, right? Is the reduction of the 50% test for taxes and bonds to 25%. And again, that's because over 25 states or more are running out of their volume cap to get 4% deals done. And we know it's not going to be twice the amount of deals, and states are coming out with their policies. Maybe it's going to be they'll give tax and bond authority the amount of their permanent debt is at 40%, 45%. So I'm really curious how many more deals, 4% tax and bond deals, are going to be created. And also, is there other gap funding for more deals? And we know equity pricing is taking a bit of a hit right now. So how is that all going to come together in 26? Is I'm really, really curious to see on that. Another thing on my radar is the continued activity in public housing repositioning. It definitely appears that HUD's current leadership is supportive of the repositioning programs. And in fact, there's going to be another update to the Section 18 program, part of the repositioning, coming out very shortly here in the new year. Also, at the end of 25, the 10-year roadmap collaborated with researchers at the Public and Affordable Housing Research Corporation to produce a new approach to the estimate of the costs of preserving public housing. And the baseline cost to preserve the nation's public housing portfolio in 2025 dollars is $169 billion. That's billion with a B. $169 billion nationwide. In other words, a lot of work remains to be done on this portfolio. There's something like over 700 to 800,000 units which have not gone through any type of repositioning yet. So again, a lot of work to be done. Another trend we talked about and we had on about 2 years ago, a gentleman from Enterprise and their faith-based development initiative is faith-based housing. And there's articles and we've seen white papers and research on, again, some 10,000 churches projected to close over the next 10 years. Older physical buildings, or maybe a congregation that's shrinking or viewing more things online. They don't need the space, exacerbated by COVID and so forth. So we're seeing a lot of faith-based organizations discerning what to do with their land, what to do with their real estate. How can they remain active? Can they activate the real estate to generate income, to keep them afloat and so forth? And we've seen various studies are part of various studies. Housing is obviously a very big piece. A lot of times these organizations and churches have been there for 100 plus years in downtown locations. And sometimes it's childcare and job training centers and just good community development. So excited to see that. Not excited, obviously, to see places closing, but excited to see how we can utilize those in community development. And then, as we kind of alluded to with Charleston and the S&P rating process, excited to see that continue to move forward. Again, how can we utilize lower cost capital? How can we get lower cost capital? And so what nonprofits, what public housing authorities out there could potentially be rated and get an investment grade rating to kind of keep acquisitions, preservation, as Garrick noted, possibly new construction projects. So a lot of things. There's a lot of challenges. We need a lot of units, but luckily there's a lot of creativity and smart minds in the industry. So Garrick, with that, that's our episode for today's BuzzHouse. Really enjoyed, again, getting out to you in 2025. Looking forward to 26. And once again, I'm Don Bernards.
And I'm Garrick Gibson.
Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. For additional resources around multifamily housing, check out bakertilly.com. If you have a suggestion for the show, email us at build@bakertilly.com. That's BUILD @bakertilly.com. See you next time on BuzzHouse.